Welcome to the second lecture of the chapter Respiration and Circulation. So today we are dealing with the next part, that is mechanism of respiration, which is 8.3. For that you can refer the page number 156 of your textbook. Okay. So in case of respiration, it is a biological process and which is going to involve exchange of gases between the atmosphere and the lungs, and it result in the formation of ATP. So this process is further divided into four parts. The first is called as breathing. Breathing is also known as pulmonary ventilation. Actually it is a physical process and it involves two sub processes, that is inspiration as well as expiration. So in this process, atmospheric air is drawn in, which is rich in oxygen, and carbon dioxide rich air which is present in your alveoli, that is released out. So that phenomena is called as breathing. So breathing, another name is called as pulmonary ventilation. So it is a process by which, that is oxygen rich air which is atmospheric air, is going to enter inside your lungs, and from the lungs or from the alveoli, carbon dioxide rich air that is thrown out. That is what breathing. In case of what, that is second part, that is external respiration, where actually we are going to talk about diffusion of gases, how the gases will be transported. So diffusion of gases, that is oxygen and carbon dioxide, so that we are going to talk. Then there is third part is called as internal respiration, where is transport of gases by the blood. So and the last process is called as cellular respiration, where diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and tissue, as well as how that ATP is formed, that we are going to discuss in the cellular respiration. So entire process, that is mechanism of respiration, is divided into four parts. First is breathing. Second is external respiration, where there is exchange of gases between the blood and atmospheric air. And third is internal respiration, that is transport of gases. And fourth is cellular respiration, where exchange of gases takes place between blood and tissue. So the flow is like this. In the breathing, there will be exchange of gases between atmosphere and the lungs. In external respiration, the exchange of gases between lungs and the blood. Internal respiration, transport of gases. And cellular respiration, that is exchange of gases between, that is blood and tissue. Now we are going to start about a first part, that is called as breathing. So already we have discussed breathing is a physical process which involves two parts, inspiration or inhalation. Another is called as expiration or exhalation. Now in this process, the part of the body which is involved, that is first is thoracic cage, then there is ribs are involved, then sternum, intercostal muscle. There are two intercostal muscle. What is intercostal muscle? These are the muscle which is present between the ribs. So there is internal intercostal muscle and external intercostal muscle, and the very important part, that is diaphragm. Okay, so all these parts are involved during a breathing process. Now we'll discuss about inspiration and expiration, that is comparatively. So inspiration, that is when the air is going to come out, or it is going to enter from atmosphere into the lungs, it is called as inspiration. Whereas expiration, it is also called as breathing out. Inspiration is called as breathing in. So breathe in is inspiration, breathe out is called as expiration. So inspiration is active process, whereas expiration is passive process. What do you mean by active process? It requires lot of energy. So in case of inspiration, the internal, that is intercostal muscle, they are going to contract, pulling the ribs outward. So remember, when the ribs are pulled outward, there are what, almost muscle also they are going to contract. Okay, and when the ribs are pulled outward, the thoracic space in the or there is a space within a thoracic cavity is going to increase. The lower part of the breastbone, that is sternum, is going to raise. Okay, so what are the changes? Inspiration is active process. Internal costal, that is intercostal muscle, are going to contract, pulling the ribs in outward direction. When the ribs are pulled outward, the space within the thoracic cavity is going to increase. Okay, at the same time, the lower part of the breastbone, that is sternum, is raised. Diaphragm is going to contract, it almost become flat. So further there is increase in the volume of the thoracic cavity. And always remember, volume is inversely proportional to the pressure. So when the volume is going to increase, the pressure on the lungs is going to decrease. So the pressure is less than the atmospheric pressure. So always remember, the air is going to move from outer side to inner side. So that is a phenomena called as inspiration. I am going to repeat it. So inspiration is active process. In that process, that is, most of the part is going to contract. First, internal muscle, that is internal or external intercostal muscle, are going to contract, pulling the ribs in outward direction. Because of that, there is increase in the space within a thoracic cavity. The lower part of the breastbone, that is sternum, it is going to move upward and outward, that is raised. So diaphragm is going to contract. Volume of the thoracic cavity increase. Volume and pressure are inversely proportion. So when the volume increase, pressure is going to decrease. And because of that, there is difference in the pressure. Always remember, the air is going to move from high pressure to low pressure. Now atmospheric pressure is more than the internal pressure, so atmospheric air is going to rush into the lungs. That is called as inspiration or inhalation. Now expiration is exactly opposite process. What happens in expiration? It is a passive process. Now here the intercostal muscles are going to relax. It is going to pulling the ribs inward. In case of the inspiration, that is intercostal muscle will contract and pulling the ribs outward. But here intercostal muscle relax, pulling the ribs inward. So because of that, there is a decrease in the space in thoracic cavity. Now the sternum is going to lowered. Okay, the sternum is going to move downward and inward. So that is, it is going to lowered as well as ribs. So there is further decrease in the volume of the thoracic cavity. Diaphragm, that is going to relax, it become dome shape. Remember, you can make out in the diagram, diaphragm become dome shape. Okay, now here the diaphragm is almost flat in case of the first diagram. In case of the second diagram, it is more curved, that is called as dome shape. So what happens overall, because of these activity, what are the activity? Intercostal muscle will contract, then ribs and sternum move downward and inward, then diaphragm become dome shape. Because of that, there is increase in, or we can say, the volume is going to decrease and pressure on the lungs is going to increase. So when the volume is going to decrease, the pressure is going to increase. So that pressure is more than the atmospheric pressure. So lungs get compressed and the air in the lungs, that is going to rush out. I hope you get inspiration as well as expiration. Both are the part of breathing mechanism. So suppose sometimes the distinguish can be asked. Write down the distinguish between, that is, inspiration and expiration. Or sometimes you may have to explain the process or mechanism of breathing. So you have to you are supposed to remember these points. So look at these points. So inspiration is active process, expiration is passive process. In case of the inspiration, the intercostal muscle are going to contract, pulling the ribs outward. Exactly opposite in case of the expiration, intercostal muscle will relax, pulling the ribs inward. Now increase in the space of the thoracic cavity, decrease in the space of the thoracic cavity. Lower part of the breastbone is raised, or you can remember the sternum is move upward and outward. Here the sternum is going to move downward and inward. So diaphragm contract, here diaphragm is going to relax. Here the diaphragm become flat, here diaphragm become dome shape. So because of these activity, volume of the thoracic cavity in case of the inspiration is going to increases. In case of the expiration, it is going to decreases. Exactly opposite process. Now the pressure of the lungs is going to decreases in inspiration. So pressure decreases, volume increases. So pressure is less than the atmospheric pressure. So atmospheric air is going to rushes into the lungs. In case of the expiration, the lungs get compressed because pressure is going to increase, volume is going to decrease. So atmospheric pressure is less than the pressure within a lungs. So lungs get compressed and the air in the lungs are going to rush out. So the distinguish can be asked between the inspiration and expiration. So you have to remember this point. So whatever that is written part is there in the PPT, you are supposed to write it down in your notebook. So obviously I will be sending that PPT in the Google Classroom. I am going to share this or through WhatsApp. So but before that, you are going to refer the video, you are going to refer the textbook, and you are going to mention the points. Now the second part is called as external respiration. Actually it is exchange of gases at alveolar level, at the level of or within a alveoli. So if you observe that alveoli is a single grape-like structure, singular is called as alveolus. So if you observe that alveolus, it is made up of single layer of squamous epithelial cells resting on the basement membrane. So you can make out innermost layer, that is called as alveolar layer. It is made up of single layer of squamous epithelial cells resting on the basement membrane. Whereas you can make out that it is surrounded by the capillaries. So whatever that red and blue color RBC you can make out, these are actually capillary which is surrounding the alveoli. So in the diagram you can make out that capillary is also single layer. It is made up of single layer of squamous epithelium cell again. That means alveoli as well as capillary is made up of a single layer of squamous epithelial cells, and both are resting on basement membrane. I hope you can remember the presence of basement membrane is a characteristic of epithelial tissue. So what is basement membrane? Basement membrane is acellular double layered membrane on which the cell are resting. So here there is only two cell barrier. So one cell of squamous epithelial of alveolus and another cell of epithelial, that is squamous epithelial cells of capillary. Now look at this diagram. If you observe that in the diagram it is mentioned alveolar layer, alveolar air. Again you can see there is a pulmonary artery and vein. So here you can see there is a word called as PO2 and PCO2. So first we'll discuss what is P. So the P stand for the partial pressure. Okay, the P stand for partial pressure. Okay, now what do you mean by partial pressure? Partial pressure is a pressure exerted by individual gas in a mixture of gas. Remember, what is partial pressure? Partial pressure is a pressure that is exerted by individual gas in a mixture of gas. So whatever gas we are going to inhale or inspired air, it is a mixture of gas. So within a mixture of gas there will be a pressure exerted by individual gas is known as partial pressure. So P stand for partial pressure. Okay, so if you observe that within a alveolar air, the partial pressure for the oxygen is 104 mm of mercury column. Always remember the pressure is calculated in terms of millimeter of mercury column. So within a alveolar air, the partial pressure is around 104 mm of mercury column. Whereas in case of carbon dioxide, partial pressure in the alveolar air is around 40 mm of mercury column. So you can make out there is a difference Okay, so you can just refer the table over here. So there is 104 mm of mercury column and 40 mm of mercury column of carbon dioxide. So alveolar air that contain, that is 104 mm of mercury column oxygen, that is a partial pressure for the oxygen, and partial pressure for the carbon dioxide is 40 mm of mercury column. Now what happens within a capillary, that is a pulmonary artery? Pulmonary artery, it also carry the blood. Now that blood has around 40 mm of mercury column, that is for the oxygen. You can see in the table. So can you see in the table? So in case of pulmonary artery, it is blue in color. So it is carrying what type of blood? Deoxygenated blood. So deoxygenated blood contain partial pressure for the oxygen is 40 mm of mercury column, whereas partial pressure for the carbon dioxide is 45 mm of mercury column. So again I am going to repeat. The alveolar air contain partial pressure for the oxygen is 104 mm of mercury column. Partial pressure for the carbon dioxide is 40 mm of mercury column. But in the pulmonary artery which carry deoxygenated blood, so the partial pressure for the oxygen is 40. You can refer to the table. Partial pressure for the carbon dioxide is 45. Now first we will just talk about oxygen. Now the partial pressure for the oxygen in the alveolar air is 104 mm of mercury column, and partial pressure for the oxygen in the pulmonary artery, which is blue in color, is around 40. So obviously 104 is more than the 40. So always remember, so air is going to move from high pressure to low pressure. So carbon dioxide, that is oxygen, is going to move from alveolar air to the pulmonary artery, or to the, what you can say, the blood which is present within the pulmonary artery. So you can see there is exchange of gases. So oxygen that oxygen is going to diffuse from the alveolar air to the blood capillaries. Now the blood become oxygenated, you can see in the pulmonary vein. Okay, that is the first part. In the second part, we'll just talk about carbon dioxide. Now you can see the carbon dioxide, partial pressure for the carbon dioxide within the alveolar layer is 40 mm of mercury column, and you can refer to the table. Carbon dioxide partial pressure in the blood, that is which is deoxygenated, that is within a pulmonary artery, is 45. So obviously 45 is more than the 40. So carbon dioxide is going to diffuse from the blood to the alveolar air. Are you getting? So in the first case, in case of oxygen, so oxygen is going to diffuse from the alveolar air to the blood, because alveolar air has more partial pressure for the oxygen, 104. Blood has less partial pressure, that is 40. So the diffusion is going to take place from higher partial pressure to lower partial pressure. Now what about carbon dioxide? Carbon dioxide within a blood, that is partial pressure is around 45. Partial pressure within alveolar is 40. So the exchange is again takes place, that is from higher concentration to lower concentration, higher partial pressure to lower partial pressure. So carbon dioxide is going to diffuse from the blood to the alveolar air. Now you can refer to the table. So the table, they have mentioned about respiratory gases, oxygen, carbon dioxide. First column is for the atmospheric air, second is alveolar air, or alveoli, third is blood which is deoxygenated. Then when it become oxygenated, that is pulmonary vein will have 95 mm of mercury column, 95 mm of mercury column and 40 mm of mercury column, that is partial pressure, and tissue will have again 40 to 45. So this table is very important because for the NEET, and this diagram is again from the NCERT. So you have to remember that diagram for your NEET exam as well. Okay, so whenever I am going to teach or I am going to send you videos, I am going to talk from NEET point of view as well. So part of the NEET will be also covered during this lecture. So this is all about external respiration. Okay, so you just read about breathing and external respiration. In the next lecture, we are going to talk about internal respiration. Okay, and transport of gases and cellular respiration in detail, but that is very difficult. First you have to understand this part.